I think one of the things that has changed a lot is just a better and more nuanced understanding of how the First Amendment works. I think, like a lot of people, I assumed that there were laws against hate speech in this country, and it turns out that there aren't. Like, hate speech isn't actually defined. And while there are hate crimes and things that kind of are paired up with speech, there's no specific hate speech exception to the First Amendment. And I remember thinking, why? But I think my case kind of explains that. That at the end of the day, it's because offensiveness can't be pinpointed. If people like to assume that we know what hate speech is, oh, I know what offensiveness is, I can point it out, and people even say it's speech that demeans folks based on part of their identity, perhaps the race, gender, religion, or some other aspect of that. But when you ask folks things like, okay, is like the movie title, White Men Can't Jump, is that hate speech? Because that's talking about white men. Most people would say, no, that's just a funny thing. I'm like, well, I bet you could find people who disagree with that. I learned that it all depends on who controls that, who has the power to make those decisions. I never once in my life would have thought that an Asian American band using the name The Slants would be considered hate speech, not until I encountered the government and was up against a government official who thought evidence from sites like UrbanDictionary.com were sufficient to drown out the voices of the Asian American community. And that's when I learned how powerful that could be, how it could be used as a tool and wielded against those who need it the most. I never really sought out to dismantle Section 2A of the Lanham Act. I always thought if we won, we can win on the premise that Asian Americans are cool with their name, that we ought to register it morally and ethically, that we were in that right position. But as I continued to fight in my case, I learned that there would never be a point where the government would be consistent in terms of making those decisions. That time and time again, when you leave it to dominant groups to make decisions about the marginalized, they're never going to get those experiences. And when you work with an under-resourced office, that's going to be even more so to that point. And that who defines speech will largely depend on who's in the administration, who's making those decisions. And frankly, that's kind of a frightening notion when you think about it. Because if you look at our long history of the United States, the people that made those decisions oftentimes didn't get it right. We had the Red Scare. We had people who justified the genocide of Native Americans. We had people who thought it was okay to lock up members of Japanese descent into concentration camps. And we have people who think that it's okay to do those things and as a matter of policy, and many of those people are still in office today. So it's like, do I want to allow them to decide what kind of speech should be protected or not? No. And if that's the case, if that means protecting the speech of people that I severely disagree with, then so be it. Because at the end of the day, our communities need it the most, and we need that protection.